I think we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of people who are still joining, but being mindful of time, we'll go ahead. So first, my name is Rex Hazelton. I'm with Cadmus, and I am working with New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and other agencies, as you see, on the Clean Corridor Coalition program. So I want to thank everybody for joining our webinar today, where we are going to be providing an introduction to the project. This is the first public-facing event that we have had since the project has been initiated. And then we are going to go over some of the responses that we heard from you all regarding an RFI that we distributed in late August regarding medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure with questions around site design, technology, some program administration questions, and other considerations as we work through the development of this project. Next slide, please. So for the agenda for today, first, we're going to have a quick introduction to the program. I'll give an explanation of the Q&A process for this webinar. Go into a large number of slides that will provide a summary of those RFI responses. And then we are going to have a long period at the end for answering of additional questions prior to us closing out. We scheduled 90 minutes for this webinar time period. The presentations should probably take about 45 minutes, give or take. So we'll have an extended period at the end to go through any questions that you all submit. Next slide, please. So for submitting your questions, at the top of your screen, you should see an icon that has a Q&A label with two chat bubbles. If you submit a question through that document, it will be transferred to our team. We will be aggregating all of those questions, and then we will be responding to them at the end. So we will actually have two brief Q&A periods. One, after there's a Peg Hannah with New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection is going to give an introduction to the program. We're going to have an opportunity for to answer some questions specifically around the structure of the program, timeline, format, things like that. And then we will have a secondary Q&A period at the end of this call where we will address specific questions about the information that we presented with the RFI. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peg to introduce the C3 program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rex. My name is Peg Hannah. I've been with New Jersey DEP for 34 years, which if you do the math, that is my entire career. I've primarily focused on transportation, at least in the last half of my career, and I'm thrilled to be here today to share with all of you this first fully public meeting on this amazing grant that we won back in October of 2024. Next slide. So we refer to this grant as the Clean Corridor Coalition, or C3 for short, and it's essentially an effort to deploy charging infrastructure for trucks on or near the I-95 corridor that spans from Connecticut through New Jersey down to Delaware and Maryland. The reason we applied for this grant is we felt that we needed a coordinated and comprehensive regional charging infrastructure, and we needed to strategically develop that. The goal was to provide charging for, in the short term, the local delivery trucks, because we know that there are more EVs in those classes of vehicles than there are in the heavier. But then in the longer term, to provide charging for the regional or long haul trucks that are class 7 and 8. We know that many of the short haul or lighter weight trucks lack access to their own facilities where they can install chargers, or depots might be capacity constrained. It's also resource intensive for individual fleets to install charging at their own depots. So relying on a third-party charging provider through this grant can sometimes be more cost effective for fleets. So that's another benefit of this project. Also wanted to emphasize that while this project has environmental benefits and it will reduce numerous pollutants, including greenhouse gases, it's also about coordination, collaboration, innovation, and cutting-edge technology. So the corridor is depicted on this map here. It runs through large population centers, major ports, freight facilities, and it was actually identified as a phase 1 priority in the federal government's, the previous administration's National Zero Emission Freight Corridor strategies. It contains priority freight hubs as well. In total, we estimate that 1.7 million people are estimated to live in a census block group adjacent to this corridor, and nearly 30% of those residents live in low income or disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So the grant is for $240 million. We partnered with Delaware, Connecticut, and Maryland, and many of my partners in crime are on this call with me today, which I'm thrilled about. We chose these states because all of us are national leaders in transportation electrification. We've been working for a long time together on policies, regulations, and incentive programs. And we believe that our longstanding history of working together and developing similar programs will ensure the success of this project. We also have the privilege of working with Maryland Department of Transportation and Delaware Department of Transportation for the first time. So they will bring a unique perspective to the table as well. Next slide. So program structure, we have a steering committee that includes representatives from all of these agencies listed here. The steering committee provides overarching direction and decision-making. Next slide. And then we have several working groups. The first working group is for workforce. So workforce was a part of our grant application, and we do have a budget allocated for that. The purpose of this work group is to enhance the workforce programs in each of the states. We are trying to identify gaps, figure out what the states need, and how do we allow job seekers to be well-trained for good paying jobs in the green economy. The second group is the community advisory group. Stakeholdering and community engagement is a very important part of this project. So this group will be looking at community needs and priorities, including the siting of the charging stations, and they will also weigh in on the workforce development piece of the project. And then finally, we will have technical work groups as needed to solicit input in technical areas. Next slide. So of the 249 million, the majority of it, about 227 million, will be used to pay for the actual charging stations. That money will be allocated in 2 rounds. The first round of RFPs will be distributed by each state individually in the first half of 2026. We expect the RFPs to be, for the most part, similar in nature, but they will have a little bit of state-specific flavor added to comply with legal requirements or terms and conditions of each state. The amount of money allocated per state for infrastructure was basically apportioned based on the PM2.5 emissions running along the I-95 corridor in each of the states. So basically the road length. So based on that, you can see that New Jersey gets the largest allocation, followed by Maryland, then Connecticut and Delaware. We would expect the $227 million to cover approximately 24 sites with about 450 charging ports of various sizes. And one of the things that Rex is going to talk about is what size those, what the power levels of those charging ports should be. And then the workforce development group that I mentioned on the previous slide, they are responsible for figuring out the best allocation for this additional $4 million. The $4 million for workforce development will also be distributed through an RFP to eligible entities sometime in 2026. Next slide. So these are the key milestones in the project. Rex is going to talk about the RFI responses that happened in the August through October timeframe. Right now, we are doing community engagement on site selection and project design and working on developing the RFPs for each state, which will be issued in the first half of 2026. We expect to award that first round of RFPs the later half of 2026. Also, in the later half of 2026 will be the RFP for workforce development programs in each state. And then we're going to rinse and repeat and issue a second round of RFPs for additional charging stations and award those contracts in 2027 to 2028. We expect to also shortly be releasing a request for teaming partners. This is similar to what US Department of Energy does. So it's essentially a self-identified database of people who might want to collaborate or partner on a response to these RFPs. So look for that coming soon. I'm going to pause now. Next slide. I'm going to pause now to see if there are any questions on the basic components or the framework of this grant before we get into the specific technical issues that came up during the RFP.
So Peg, we have two questions that have been submitted so far. The first is probably on most people's minds, which is what is the risk to the grant being canceled?
So I'm feeling very confident that this grant will not be canceled. It has not been targeted as many of the other grants have been. It was awarded, the grant agreement was signed, executed with EPA prior to the Trump administration coming in. So all of the documents had their I's dotted and T's crossed. And we have been drawing down money for the past 9 months without any problem at all. We meet with our EPA Region 2 project manager every month. We review with him our progress and ask him if there are any red flags. All of those monthly conversations have gone well. There has been no indication that the federal government has any concerns with the way this grant is proceeding. So as of right now, I don't think there is a risk.
Thank you. We have a question on who are the sub-awardees for the project. So just to reiterate, the other states who are involved in this project, and it's the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, so New Jersey, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, the Delaware Department of Transportation, and then the Maryland Department of Transportation and Maryland Department of the Environment. So it's those 4 states that are working together. New Jersey is the lead entity, and the other 3 states are the subawardees. To get added, how does a vendor get added to the self-identified list? We will send out an announcement when that capability or when that list has been posted. This is an idea that came up fairly recently that we got approval to do that. So that will be posted on the C3 website. We'll share a link at the end if you don't have that already, and to let vendors know that they can register on that page. Question, what are the program goals for target charger count per site? We'll get a little bit into that in the RFI responses. We do not have a specific number of ports identified that will be required, though we got some good feedback about that. Also, with the number of sites overall across the 4 states, there were some general targets about the number of sites, around 24. But again, that is not a requirement of this project. We will attempt to meet that, but using some of the feedback that we received from the RFI responses and understanding the state of the market and what industry needs are for charging, that number of sites and number of ports may vary a bit. We also have a question around data centers and let's see, requiring the development of a data center in each state. No, there would not be a specific need for there to be a data center developed for each state for this project. There we will be having specific requirements around data security in the RFP, and vendors would need to be submitting a data management plan. We also will have some reporting requirements, and everything that's coming in that we are reporting to EPA will be done through a secure transfer, and we would be providing greater details about what how that process will go in the future. Question, is the project envisioning ground-up development or allocating funding to existing charging hubs located in the region?
I don't think that's off the table. I think that will be considered.
Yes, I think that we do not have any specific goal to develop brand new charging hubs. If it makes sense for where utilization will be the highest, and if there are existing sites that could be expanded that have existing capacity and it might improve speed to market, then I think that would be well within the context of this program.
And to build on that, we do not have specific sites identified, nor do we plan to have specific sites identified. We anticipate letting the market do what it's supposed to do, and so the people responding to the RFP will be proposing the sites. We may have some geographic constraints or areas that we want you to focus on, but we will not be giving you an address where you need to install charging stations.
And we'll get into that a little bit more in the RFI responses, which I think that is all the questions we've received so far. So we can move on to the next section. So just to reintroduce myself for those who have joined a little late, my name is Rex Hazelton. I am working with Peg and team from Maryland, New Jersey, Delaware, and Connecticut on the C3 program. And I'm going to be going through an overview of the responses we received to the RFI that we distributed in August. So for this first slide, what you see, we received 41 responses to the RFI that was distributed on August 27th. We gave a month for folks to respond. In those responses, about 50%, so 41 responses in total, about 50% of those we received that were from either charging hardware, software, or charging vendors. So those who are EVSPs, NSPs, providing their insight regarding charging needs, charging technologies. We received a number of responses from either advocacy organizations, NGOs, or trade groups representing those interested in medium and heavy duty space and in the charging sector. We heard from two vehicle OEMs who provide vehicles in the class 3 to 8 in the vehicle classes, and 3 fleet operators and vehicle logistics suppliers. Just as a precursor before we get into the RFI responses, want to make sure it's clear that what we are presenting today is the feedback that we heard. No statements that are made today are trying to define the approach that will be taken by any of the states as we distribute the RFP. These are simply an overview of the information that was collected. Next slide, please. So we're going to be dividing up the responses into 3 topic areas. The first one that I'm going to be going into is site design. So one of the questions that we asked was to understand whether smaller, more frequent stations were preferable or be better serve the industry versus larger charging hubs. The feedback that we heard is that large hubs are more likely to have amenities and services to serve drivers, but they do have a far longer development timeline and can face specific challenges when it comes to land use and permitting. But they are those sites that may best facilitate freight transportation, Class 7 and 8 vehicles. Smaller sites of 10 to 15 charging ports can typically be deployed faster and can enhance redundancy on the system, which can improve the perceived reliability or availability of charging for drivers. But it came pretty, the response received was very clear that taking a hybrid approach across the states, whereby we have probably a larger number of smaller sites that are supported around a handful of charging hubs that have a large number of charging ports, say 30 to 40, would best help meet the needs of freight transportation in the region. Another thing that we heard repeatedly was around the need for these sites to be scalable, modular, so enabling to oversize the infrastructure, building out installing stub outs, so that over time these sites can meet growing demand as more vehicles are deployed. And next slide, please. We asked questions around different categories of vehicles and what types of charging charging sites would be provide the highest utilization for those. Found that Class 2B to 6 vehicles, they're expected primarily to be using overnight depot charging. So at potentially fleet-owned charging hubs, less reliant on some public charging infrastructure. Although, as Peg mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we did hear that many smaller fleets may be facing the decision of, do they want to electrify, or can they afford to both install charging and electrify? Or maybe a fleet does not own their property, and so they are prevented from installing charging, in which case many of those smaller fleets will be reliant on public charging. So having that distribution to meet the needs of both types of operators is going to be critical. Class 7 and 8 vehicles, long-haul trucks, will be a major user of particularly large hub charging sites. Though in the short term, the smaller classes of vehicles will likely be what we be seeing on the market in the next few years. We also asked around overnight charging at these sites. The feedback we received was that overnight charging should not be mandatory as a requirement for site design. However, it would be useful in some cases as project developers think about what vehicle types and what types of operators might be using their specific site. But that if there is overnight charging, it should be physically separated from any of the en route charging, opportunity charging sites. Next slide, please. So one thing we were trying to understand was, what are some of the specific site design criteria that we should be thinking about between medium duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles, in terms of what the land use demand is, what some of the site design considerations are. And so for Class 7 and 8, we heard that there's a clear need for higher power charging, which may require some larger land footprints. It should be required, or let site developers present pull-through charging, so that they are organized more similar to existing fueling infrastructure. For those higher power chargers, there should be considerations for integrating the megawatt charging standard. And for some of those larger sites, the integration of distributed energy resources and battery storage is something that should be under consideration. For those sites which are focused on serving medium duty vehicles, those sites can be pulling or back in. You don't need nearly as large of a land footprint, and may have lower power charging requirements. But we did hear that for those sites that are meant to serve all vehicle types, whether that's light duty vehicles, medium duty, heavy duty vehicles, that there should be a clear separation between those charging bays for safety considerations, reasons, vehicle queuing, things like that. Next slide, please. On the topic of mixed use charging, so for those finding out more about those sites that are going to serve you different vehicle types, we are wondering around what whether it should be required that sites be able to serve multiple vehicle classes, or if we should leave that up to site developers, particularly around integrating light duty vehicle charging with medium and heavy duty vehicle charging. And that ties back to the question earlier around whether we would be looking at brand new sites or potentially expanding existing sites. And so there may be instances where a proposed project could be an existing charging site that primarily serves light duty vehicles that would be expanded to also provide charging for medium and heavy duty vehicles. We did hear again clearly that there should be distinct both physical barriers between light duty vehicles and medium and heavy duty charging, as well as wayfinding and signage and driving pathways to make sure that those two groups are separated. For vehicle queuing, we also heard that each specific site is going to have its own requirements in terms of what that layout looks like. Being able to, we will not, the feedback was to not be prescriptive around what queue management, vehicle management should look like in any specific site, but there are some best practices that we should be considering and that we should take into consideration as we review proposals. Things like clear signage, staging space, specific vehicle queuing lanes, and we'll talk a little bit about different operational models, but specifically looking at reservation-based and digital queuing systems to help minimize the number of vehicles that might be on site at any given time. Next slide, please. So around charger maintenance, we were interested to hear around what specific considerations there might be and differentiation between charging sites that are specific to light duty vehicles versus medium and heavy duty vehicles. And we heard that medium and heavy duty vehicles do have significantly more wear and tear on equipment because they have potentially higher utilization. And because many of the components have accelerated wear and tear, it's important to have backup equipment to be able to advance repairs rapidly. Because these are more customized sites, there can be a problem getting that backup equipment, which can lead to extended downtime. And also the consideration that within a specific site for higher power charging, one individual charger may represent a larger portion of the overall site capacity. And so a failure of a single port could have an outsized impact on the overall operations of that site. But again, many of the considerations are going to be similar with light duty vehicles, and that many of the best practices around light duty vehicle charging would be applicable to the sites that would be funded under the C3 project. Next slide, please. We asked a couple of questions around distributed energy resources, specifically solar and energy storage. I'm asking around maybe if they should be a required component of this project or a project, of the RFPs that are distributed, and understanding what some of the costs and benefits of integration of these systems are. The general feedback we got, it's understandable that solar and storage will likely add to the upfront cost for any site. It will also probably add time to the project development timelines. But in some instances, it can improve project development timelines, particularly in those areas that are capacity constrained. And that battery storage in particular can be beneficial for sites, both for defraying some of the costs, things like demand charges, or enabling a site to become operational as capacity expansions take place. Rather than requiring developers to integrate DERs or solar, the feedback that we received is that should be left up as a consideration for the developer. So that's something that we will be taking into consideration as we develop the RFP. A last item was specific to medium and heavy duty charging. The land use requirements for solar installation to meet that level of charging demand is likely going to be prohibitive for many of the proposed sites that will have fairly significant energy demand, electricity demand at those sites. So solar may not be feasible to have a meaningful impact on the amount of electricity generated at the site. Next slide, please. We also asked about mobile and temporary charging. We did receive a lot of feedback on this topic, and that there's definitely some use cases, particularly in trying to bring sites to operations rapidly, where they could be deployed and be helpful, particularly around trailer mounted DCFC and large scale battery storage to help support some of these sites. It was emphasized that temporary mobile charging solutions is not a long-term strategy, nor should it be a focus for site development in general. But for some specific sites that a project developer feels like they would have a meaningful benefit in terms of timeline or on costs for the project, that it's something that should be considered as we review projects. Next slide, please. In terms of operating models, we were interested to hear about what types of operations are likely to be proposed, and what provides the best support to drivers in terms of accessibility to charging. The three models that we specifically asked around first was first come, first serve. So basically just an open public charging installation. Second was reservation based, whereby a site could either be entirely reservation based. So a fleet or a driver can reserve a charger for a specific amount of time, or have a portion of the chargers at that site be available for reservations or for first come, first served operations. And lastly, around a subscription-based model where specific fleets would have access to chargers. I do want to note that in our RFP we outlined that these sites will be public and semi-public charging installations, and so there may be operations or projects that are submitted whereby some portion of the chargers do not have full first come, first serve operations, to improve that flexibility and give fleets the access to charger reliability as the industry progresses. We heard back that a hybrid of the first two options is most number of respondents supported. There's particular concern around subscription-based models that it might prevent specific users from being able to access those chargers, or require specific network systems or technologies to be deployed at those sites, and wanted to ensure that there's interoperability for users and between those sites. Having some level of reservation-based systems is likely going to be important as there's more vehicles, but understanding that to date, there hasn't been a large number of these type of sites that have been built. So there need to be the ability to build in flexibility for how these sites may operate moving into the future. Next slide, please. So next, we're going to move into a portion of responses that are really around project design criteria and what the project development process could look like. Next slide, please. So we wanted to find out information about what can be done to improve permitting processes. Understanding that for these types of projects, the design and permitting phase can be the lengthiest period of time for a large site. So what we wanted to understand about things we can do as the RFP designers and within the states to help incentivize or improve the efficiency of that process. And what we heard is that both the state agencies can proactively engage with some of the local governments, authorities having jurisdictions, and utilities to let them know about the project and let them know that project developers are likely to be proposing projects to them, let them know about the C3 program at the outset. Also promote to potential applicants to establish those relationships prior to submitting an application to us, in order to make sure that as projects are awarded, that developers can hit the ground running. We want to try to work with those local entities to provide permitting requirements to the extent possible, that we can try to distribute some of that information to prospective applicants ahead of time, and with the utilities, seeing if we can organize around providing capacity maps, understanding where projects might best be able to be deployed in the short term. Next slide, please. Again, so we asked similarly on utility requests and how we can work directly with the utilities ahead of time in order to facilitate these projects. As I just mentioned, around capacity maps, but asking for utilities to provide things like upgrade timelines for what capacity expansion would look like, with what grid expansion it would be necessary for the types of projects that will be funding under this program. Asking for information about where interconnection might be simplest. Asking for what types of requirements the specific utilities may have in terms of standardized templates that they can provide to project developers. What are some project development checklists that we can provide, or the utility can provide for us. We can help to identify what utilities have existing incentive programs, whether that's make-ready programs that might be able to be leveraged in combination with C3 program funding, and establishing points of contact within each of the utilities to help facilitate with project developers. Next slide, please. We asked about project development timelines. What the feedback that we heard was that for larger sites, say 30 to 40 plus ports, we'd be looking at a timeline of anywhere from 2 to 3 years, potentially more. We have worked with a lot of project developers over the last few years in California, and we're seeing development timelines of beyond 36 months in many cases for those larger sites. And for smaller sites, the expectation was that sites could take between 12 and 18 months to develop. A primary consideration for those development timelines, there's permitting, as we mentioned earlier, as well as procurement of switchgear transformers, other high power charging hardware. There's been some significant supply chain delays over the last couple of years in procuring that equipment, which can significantly delay project execution. Next slide, please. We also asked about how the current economic environment and tariffs are potentially impacting project developers. We heard that from 12 of the respondents that they are seeing supply chain delays extend as a result of tariffs, particularly with seeing increased prices on steel and aluminum in terms of project cost impacts, and that switchgear continues to be an issue for projects as well as transformers. For those respondents who did not see specific impacts from tariffs, did see that utility and permitting timelines continue to have the largest impact on project timelines. Next slide, please. The next set of slides we're going to be talking through are around considerations for the C3 program project design. Some considerations around requirements in the RFP or how we might go about administering the program. Next slide, please. So we asked around proximity. So at the beginning of this project, Peg mentioned that we will not be providing geographic point requirements of where a site is going to go. We have a somewhat flexible definition of what does proximity mean to the corridors that were highlighted at the beginning of this presentation along I-95 and some adjacent highways. So we're asked about whether it made more sense for that to be a spatial requirement. So 1 mile from an exit, similar to how it was done with NEVI, or a functional metric makes more sense. So a travel time from a specific corridor site. We heard back that functional metrics are maybe more representative of how fleets actually operate. And a distance of a 5 to 10 minute drive from the corridor would be a reasonable type of a distance to use as an operational guideline. There's general consensus that using a functional metric like that would be more advantageous than having a minimum or maximum distance from the corridor. It was recommended that there could be some sort of tiered scoring system for applicants who are in closer geographic proximity to the corridor. Again, this is not a recommendation or a statement of anything we were going to be doing, but that was a recommendation that we heard. Using spatial metrics, the major concern was that that could potentially push developers to propose sites that do not match the needs of the industry. And we are not trying to be, or we want to avoid being prescriptive in trying to push project developers to go into any specific location, but instead let the market provide feedback to us about what makes the most sense, what locations will best support drivers throughout the 4 states. In terms of other considerations, prioritizing where there is existing grid capacity to bring these projects online faster. If there's significant upgrades needed, then that could extend project timelines by a number of years in some instances. So looking at that metric as one of the criteria for site selection could make sense. Also want to look at those sites where there are amenities to drivers. We don't want to have stranded assets, don't want to have specific, large charging sites where drivers don't have access to other services while they're there charging their vehicle. So trying to prioritize those types of sites that have more resources for drivers is something that we heard loud and clear. Next slide, please. We asked about taking a statewide versus a corridor-based approach. This really being, would we have segments divided up within a state for applicants to respond to, or will there be a broad-based approach where applicants could apply to a number of sites across the state or to a specific site anywhere in the state? We did hear that corridor segments were more. We heard more positive responses to taking a corridor-based approach based upon to ensure that there is a greater distribution of sites across the state. But in the statewide approach, it might create a more efficient application process. Just in a sense of time, I'm going to move through the next couple of slides. In terms of charger uptime, we did hear a general consensus that the 97% uptime approach was advocated for. That what is required in NEVI. This is because it's necessary for these industry. These are the types of projects that are leading the market, and so enhancing their operational abilities is going to be really important to build consumer confidence, and as well for fleet operations. They need to have reliability of charging to not negatively impact their operations. So if any fleet is going to electrify, they really need to have that confidence that they'll be able to charge their vehicle. So having a high uptime requirement is going to be very important. Next slide, please. Again, within NEVI standards, in addition to the 97% uptime requirement, there's some considerations of, some of the requirements in the NEVI program are not applicable to medium and heavy duty charging. Some of those considerations would make a lot of sense around like ADA compliance and how leveraging meeting some of those standards might allow applicants to leverage multiple funding sources to complement funding available under C3. Some of the other standards we should consider, we heard around the megawatt charging standard, MCS, that many of the NEVI pricing standards likely wouldn't make sense for medium and heavy duty dwell times, and some of the layout requirements would need to be changed. Next slide. For minimum power rating, we heard that there's 2 approaches that we might want to consider. One is rather than having a minimum power rating for the charges at a site, we might want to take a minimum total site capacity, say 3 megawatts for any given site. We could potentially also have, say, 8 ports of a minimum of 150 kilowatts, but allow flexibility for how a project developer would meet an additional 3 megawatt threshold. So we really want to leave it, potentially leave it to give it flexibility to applicants for what that charger mix would look like based upon what they expect utilization to look like in the market that they're going to be supplying. Next slide, please. For project incentive structures, we were looking to get feedback around what would best, how we could best orient funding allocation to increase speed to market for these sites. You know, we're going to have 2 funding rounds under this project. So having the opportunity for applicants to try to bring those chargers online as fast as possible, so we can understand what that next round of funding may best be applied to. Looking at a milestone-based approach for project development could enhance the accountability of vendors. We could also look at a tiered structure for those incentives, whereby the amount of funding that could be allocated to a given project is greater based upon greater flexibility of the number of vehicle types that it is serving, the amount of public accessibility it has, and what the amenities are for any given site. We heard that incentives should be based upon % of eligible project costs rather than as a specific dollar cap based upon per charger. And we also heard that we should try to enhance the flexibility so that project developers can leverage other funding sources to meet some of that cost share match that may be required under this funding opportunity. We also heard that there could be opportunity for incentives for issues for minimum revenue guarantees if utilization is extremely low in the first years of operation, potentially setting up incentives for demand charge relief or applying some of those incentives, those funding for early L&M support, are all some potential considerations that we heard back from in the responses. Next slide, please. We also asked around workforce development needs. As Peg mentioned at the beginning, there is going to be a separate workforce development RFP that is distributed under this program that will come out from the states. That's specifically looking at ensuring that local populations within each of the 4 states have the necessary skills to be able to participate in both the construction and operations of these programs. So looking at how we can develop that talent pipeline locally, looking at some operating training programs like EVITP and some of the safety training programs. There are EVSE technician programs that exist locally that might be able to be leveraged for this program, as well as looking at apprenticeship programs and working with unions in each of the 4 states to establish some of those workforce training programs. We've been looking at a lot of the existing programs that operate in each of the 4 states to try to be complementary to existing programs and not reinvent the wheel in any way. We want to make sure that any resources that we have under this program best serves the needs of the community and is able to provide training to the largest potential population of local residents. Next slide, please. Lastly, looking through some of the other things that we heard, specifically around community engagement and prioritizing local community needs. So ensuring that safety is paramount with all of these projects and making sure that we are trying to prioritize those sites that are of greatest benefit to the community. So that's going to be necessary, and we will be doing significant stakeholder engagement activities throughout this project, both as C3. We will be doing community listening sessions. We're doing virtual and in-person events. And there will also be likely be requirements for project applicants to do some stakeholder engagement as part of their projects to make sure that there's local consensus of approval for these projects moving forward, understanding what the potential consequences of new development is on those communities and what the benefits are in terms of health impacts and job creation locally. There's also feedback around trying to incentivize renewable energy and battery storage DERs into the scoring criteria, which is something that we've talked about at multiple points during this presentation, and try and just make sure that we are engaging with industry and communities in each of the states throughout this project. And as we move between round 1 and round 2, that we integrate many of the learnings and experiences that we have to help improve the project as we execute it. Next slide, please. So I think that brings us to the end of the presentation period. I know you all have been submitting questions throughout that presentation, so we will go ahead and work through those. If anybody wants to submit additional questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat. And I'm going to go through, answer questions as I can, and may call on other members of the team to provide feedback or additional clarification. First, easy question. Will this be distributed? Yes, we will be distributing this presentation. We will be sending out a link to all registrants. We will also be posting this presentation on the C3 website, so it'll be made available to everyone. Question, will MCS be the connector standard? It will not be the connectors. Well, I won't say we're not may make any statement around what the requirements are. The consideration of MCS is something that we are undertaking, but having it be the sole connector standard, because we're going to be serving a large, these program sites will be serving class 2B through 8 vehicles. So the charger connector types will be varied. The charger power ratings will be varied, and we will be trying to be flexible in terms of what technologies are being used based upon the needs of the industry. Can you assume the areas under discussion are off I-95 itself? Yes. So you can see on the C3 website, it'll also be in this presentation, the corridors that are actually available for charging to be deployed within each of the 4 states. We will be, in the coming months, be publishing a more detailed project map that you will be able to review and zoom in and get some more detail around the project. But for now, you can look at that project map to see what areas are generally available for project developers and where sites are going to be going. That is primarily along I-95, but is not entirely on I-95. There are other corridors that are proposed, or other highways and road segments that are proposed. Has anything been done to get Virginia or North Carolina into this group for future programs? So Virginia and North Carolina were not part of the initial application to EPA which is how this project was funded. That said, there will be coordination between other states. It's really important from a market development standpoint that across the Northeast and throughout the East Coast and nationally, but that there is active coordination around where these sites are going and where how they are developed, what are some of the design features that should be prioritized. So we do intend to be coordinating with other states throughout project execution, but they are not actually part of the steering committee or the application group itself. Peg, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add specific to that.
No, I think that's correct. I mean, if we had all the money in the world, we would be happy to work with Virginia and the other states for charging stations, but we are allocating the money among the 4 states that were in the application.
I think so. The next question is similar in nature about Pennsylvania. That Pennsylvania simply was not part of the initial application group. We agree that the Philadelphia area could be a great location and to attract Philadelphia fleets. Agree wholeheartedly. There will certainly be hopefully some coordination between Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, because we want to ensure that as medium and heavy duty charging sites are deployed, that they're done so in a pragmatic and organized manner. We don't want there to be duplication of effort or anything like that. And Peg, some comment to that?
I would just add that Pennsylvania, Maryland, and there's one other state who his name is escaping me now. We did apply for and were awarded a grant for charging truck charging in those 3 states. It was awarded under the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, but it has been at a standstill under this federal administration. So if we are able to move that grant forward, we would potentially have money for additional stations in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Next question is around dwell time, really, and limitations on the amount of time a vehicle can stay at a specific charging port. So in terms of what limitations there will be, I think we're going to be leaving that up to the project developers for how they are going to be operating their sites. The intention here is for this program to help catalyze the market and help to bring these technologies and install chargers in a manner that is supportive in the short term to enhance long-term viability and operations of these sites. So how the actual operations will take place at any of those sites, we may have some requirements in the RFP, but in terms of how how a specific site and site operator controls how long an individual is parked at a charger, I think that will probably be left to the project operator. Question, during the RFP, would preference be given to firms respondents that can expedite the design and engineering timelines to decrease development timelines? It's a good question. I don't think there's no statement that we can make about whether preference would be given at this time. Though, as you mentioned, we will be interested in those projects that can come online rapidly. And so having a project that in which some of that design and permitting may have already been completed or there are existing relationships that would be beneficial to a project in terms of trying to get that getting that project online as fast as possible. Would make-ready incentives be allowed to be applied for project costs in addition to funds for the program? So we are currently considering how other incentives can be used to leveraged to complement C3 funding. I don't think we can't make any declarative statements about how additional funding sources can be used at this point. But that is something that we are currently discussing, and we want to. The the hope is that we can make this as flexible as possible, so that applicants have the greatest potential to build out a site that is economically viable in the long term, and hope that we can be incorporating other funding mechanisms into this project. Let's see. Our adoption projections informing where projects will go. What is informing these projections? TCO. So good question, and good point that I don't think that I referenced at the beginning of this presentation. So the RFI responses the RFI that we distributed. First, we was informed by RFIs that were previously distributed in California and by FHWA around medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure. And then our program design is also going to be informed by two studies that are just now being published. One by National Grid in the Northeast for projections for medium and heavy duty charging need, and as well as a Department of Energy funded study looking at an East Coast commercial ZEV corridor. Both of these studies were developed to identify where the potential greatest charging need would be and try to assess what the installed capacity would be necessary to meet charging demand along on the East Coast. And so our site selection, those two studies, is something that is going to inform decision making and will likely be referenced material in the RFPs, but they will not be the guiding necessarily be the guiding requirement for where these sites will go. But those resources are things that we will make available in the future through the C3 website, the updated C3 website, so that potential developers can look at, have access to all the relevant publications that have been developed in recent months that will inform some of the decision making around C3. Question, will there be a grid impact analysis, and will this be required by individual site developers or the coalition? So in terms of doing a grid impacts analysis, I think that is something partially that will be done in coordination with the utilities by site developers to understand what those load curves and demand spikes would look like for a given site. During project execution, there will be reporting requirements on utilization. And so the coalition would, similar to what is done in the NEVI program in terms of reporting on charger utilization, overall demand, so to understand what kind of impacts this is having locally on the grid. We have not come to any determination on what a specific grid impacts analysis might look like or be required under this program, but it's something certainly that is under consideration and would be necessary for project developers as they work with the utility to get these projects approved. How many medium and heavy duty vehicles are you expecting to meet their charging needs when this project is completed? So we do not have a specific projected number that we can provide at this time in terms of what that utilization will look like. We would expect that project developers would have an estimate for the number of vehicles that might be served by each of the proposed sites, and overall, the intent is for this funding to help drive the market. And we understand that in early years of these projects, utilization may be low, although sites that might have a reservation-based system that are working with specific fleets might have higher utilization at the outset. But the expectation is that as these sites are in later years of operation, that utilization will increase and the number of vehicles that will be served will increase. So we don't have a specific number to correlate to at this point. You see, foresee requirements in the composition of teams submitting proposals. So we are a major consideration we are undertaking right now is who are the potential applicants for this, whether we're going to have any specific requirements about the types of entities that will be able to apply for the funding. That's something that will be refined over the coming months. In terms of the composition of teams, with the inclusion of community development organizations, community benefit organizations, local groups, local governments. I also don't have any specific requirements to communicate about what we'll need, or that might be required in the RFPs. Though I will say that it is likely or advantageous for project applicants who would be able to display existing relationships at the local level where these projects would potentially be sited, and engagement with local governments to help facilitate permitting is something that would probably be beneficial for these projects as well. So whether that is the actual composition of teams or identification of what those relationships might look like, there could be benefits there, but again, at this time, there's no specific requirements in the RFPs, so can't make any declarative statements one way or the other for that. So I think those are all the questions we received at this time. If there's anything that I may have missed, I don't think. We do have a statement that safety should be a primary consideration in scoring of these proposals, and we agree. We will have, there will be requirements for project developers to be providing numerous criteria for how they are going to design their site in terms of safety, management of queuing, how different vehicle types will be organized at the site, what the ingress and egress points are going to be, a wide variety of safety considerations that will be incorporated into these projects. I think if we do not have any other questions, then just like to thank everybody for joining us today. We are excited to move forward with this project. If we can go down a couple more slides, just to outline the timetable that Peg referenced at the beginning. For the infrastructure RFPs, there is going to be a separate RFP that is distributed by each of the 4 participating states. There is going to be a commonality between the 4 RFPs. Hopefully the majority of the requirements will be similar in structure, but each state, given their own procurement rules, there will be specific requirements for each of the states for what that looks like. So there will be separate RFPs distributed, and those will be expected in the first half of next year, with projects awarded in the second half of the year. We'll try to, on both of those timelines, try to make that as early as possible for both distributing the RFP and making those awards. The workforce development RFP, that will also be expected in the second quarter of 2026. That will likely be a single RFP that covers all 4 states. Part of what we were trying to accomplish with workforce development is that the training and offerings, the training provided to residents in each of the 4 states are transferable between the states. So hopefully we can facilitate a single RFP that covers all 4 states rather than there being individual RFPs. And this is a 2-round program. So moving into 2027 is when we will be looking to issue that next round solicitation. Next slide, please. So we will be distributing this slide deck. These are points of contact for each of the 5 entities that are on the steering committee, as well as a link to our program website where this webinar will be posted, as well as additional updates coming out of the program. Next slide. Lastly, just to wrap up, we also have an information account. This is where program materials will be distributed coming from in the future, and a final link to the website. I want to thank you all very much for participating today, and see, Peg, if you have any closing comments that we'd like to make before we wrap up.
No closing comments. Thank you all. Look forward to spending the money.
Thanks all. Good afternoon.